What up, everybody? I'm Zach. Welcome back to Case Digital, and in this video we're going to talk about how you can find what attributes or functions are within a class or object. So without further ado, let's hop in and start coding. Everybody, in this video, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about how you can find out what functions or what attributes are within a class or object. I know we've talked a lot about ints and floats, that we just talked about data types, the number data types, and in the next video we're going to talk about the data type of strings, and in there's some functions that you can do, but well, how do you know what functions you can do on something if you are new to it? Well, to show you, what I did is I created a very simple class object, and we're going to discuss classes more in depth later, but this is just kind of the basic structure. You'll get used to just seeing something like this. And here's the initialization function or method, and here's a method called getFullName. And what I did is I created an object called Jim that is an instance of a class, of the class person, with these values passed into it. Now if I run this, you'll see that it prints out Jim Smith, because this Jim.getFullName goes in here and says get the first name and the last name, and we know from the instantiation first and last is assigned to there. So how would I know how would I know what methods or attributes would be in a function if I didn't write it myself? Like in this, I wrote it myself, so I know what it has. Well, there's a nice and handy built-in function called dir, and what that does is if I do print dir and I do let's say person of the actual class, and I print this out, what you're going to see here is you're going to see a list of basically just different names, of basically just different function or attribute names. And don't necessarily worry about the underscore ones. We'll talk more about those later when they're related to classes. But look here, it shows you that there's this getFullName that can be some attribute called getFullName that we can use. Now look what happens if we change it to doing a dir of the object of Jim. So Jim again is a object of the class, or is an instance of the class. And so if I do this again, I'm just going to reset this, get this to go away. I'm going to do Python. I'm going to do Python, and I'm going to do person.py. Now look what happens. So this top one right here, this is of person, and this bottom one right here, this is of the object Jim. Notice the difference? Here it has getFullName, and here it has first name, full name, getFullName, and last name. So the difference is being that when you have a object, it'll show, when you do dir on an object, it'll show you all the attributes that it has, which Jim object has these attributes, whereas the class just has the attribute of these functions. These attributes will go to the actual objects that get instantiated. So that is one handy way to find out what functions or attributes there are to be able to run for a class that you don't know. So for instance, we talked about ints. So if I do print a dir of int, and I'll reset this, and then I'll run. I'm going to hit up on my up arrow, get that to person. I'm going to run it. Now look. Here's those underscore ones. Again, don't worry about those. But then you have these as integer ratio, bit length, conjugate, denominator, from bytes, imaginary, numerator, real, 2 bytes. Now if I do float, could do these as well, and you'll see that it has the exact same thing. There's all the underscored ones, and then we have as integer ratio, conjugate, from hex, imaginary, is integer, real. And another one that I wanted to show you is when we start talking about strings, because this is going to be handy when we start in our next one and talk about strings. So reset that, and I'm going to do string. Just remember, we learned that in our last one that str is the type for string. And when we run this, look at all these different functions now that show up. Capitalize, or all these attributes that show up. Capitalize, casefold, center, count, encode. This is just a quick way to see what attributes and functions are within a class or object that you may have no experience with, that you just want to see, well, how does this work? Now, another way that you could do just to see on different things is you could do help str And this, I believe, this doing help str will print out a lot more information on how these are ran and more information about them. So if we go down here, we show capitalized. It looks like it's a function, and it returns the capitalized version of the string. And we could do this again on int. And you have to hit Q on that to get out, by the way. Because you see these colons in here, I could go all the way to the end. And see it says end, but now how do I get out? I just press Q. But for instance, we go through all these and we see all the underscores. I get to the ones that weren't on underscore, and it looks like it's a function. It returns an integer ratio. So here's an example. 10 as an integer ratio will return this. Negative 10 will return this. 0 will return this. Bit length, number of bits necessary to represent. So I mean, this is just a way. These are two helpful functions to know what is in a class and how you can use them. So play with that and see on our, like we did with our last video on ints and floats, and play with these two functions. See how that can help you, and then we'll cover strings in more depth in the next video. So until then, keep coding.